The Blue Jackets game was postponed last night, but don't worry, we've still got stuff to talk about. Hadi Kalakeche is back, and we have got more prospect talk. Today, we're going to be talking about Cole Sillinger, who we love, and Jordan Dumais, who just signed his entry-level contract on Friday. That's all coming up today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you news, stories, game previews, game recaps, prospect talk, draft talk, playoff talk, maybe, and all of the above and more about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and also over on YouTube. So, please hit the subscribe button over there, hit the download button on Apple Podcasts, rate, review, leave a comment, whatever you have the time to do. I super appreciate everything anything that you guys find the time to do to support the show. I appreciate all of you. Today's episode, we're going to continue the conversation that I started yesterday with Hadi Kalakeche, host of Locked On NHL Prospects. We're talking a little bit about Cole Sillinger, the sophomore slump, and why we shouldn't necessarily be worried that he is not putting up as many points as he was last season. And we're also talking about maybe one of the steals of the 2022 draft. Jordan Dumais just signed his entry-level contract on Friday and currently has, I think, an 11-point lead on the QMJHL scoring race. So we're going to talk about both of those guys with Hadi. So I'm just going to get right into that conversation. I want to talk about our other first-round pick one of our other first-round picks from that draft. I think it's fair to say the biggest surprise out of the 2021 draft, the Blue Jackets somehow ended up getting Cole Sillinger at 12th overall. And then, I spoke to a bunch of people about him and they were like, yeah, he's good. Send him back to the WHL for a season. He's going to be even great. He's going to be even better. And then he comes into training camp and he doesn't get cut. And he makes it to the preseason and he doesn't get cut, and he plays most of the games and doesn't get cut. And there's a quote from Brad Larson that I still think is extremely funny, where he's talking to the media and he's like, I keep looking for reasons to get rid of him, and he's just not giving me any. And then obviously he was the only player, he was the only first round pick in that draft to play the entire season. Mason McTavish and William Eklund both got their 9 games and then went back to their junior teams or back to Sweden.
Yep.
Cole Sillinger had 31 points in his rookie season, which I think, honestly, on a team as bad as the Blue Jackets were, is really good. However, he is struggling this season, and I can't figure out why. So I wanted to kind of get some thoughts on what you think of Cole Sillinger, what you think of his season so far, and is there anything that we should maybe be worried about, or is this just a typical kind of sophomore slump?
So just to sort of explain a bit the sophomore slump and where that sort of comes from and why that's such a common phenomenon, it's the hunger. So in his draft plus 1 year, heading out of getting drafted and going right into preseason for Columbus, working his way into the NHL, there was hunger every step of the way with Sillinger. This year, it was sort of a given that he was going to stay with the team, because there's no real sort of purpose in sending him down or etc. when he's, proven his worth last season as freshly drafted prospect, as the only prospect from that first round to make the NHL and stick to it long term. There's just usually a step back in terms of hunger, and there's usually a sort of roadblock in terms of, okay, I've done all this in my rookie season. Where do I go from here? So the idea of building up from his draft year is what's sort of limiting him right now in his sophomore year. It's just the idea that, I want to add this, I want to add that to my game. All that sort of, it puts a lot of pressure on a player, and some players react positively to pressure. I don't think Cole Sillinger necessarily reacts positively to pressure. He reacts positively to adversity, when he's not expected, being the underdog is something he's comfortable with, but as soon as it comes to actual pressure, um, it's sort of more difficult for him. And this is something I noticed in his draft years that Cole Sillinger's skating stride isn't ideal either. So he was doing all that he was doing against, you know, bottom six competition, playing against the types of guys that he can dominate against due to his skill set. He's really good along the wall. He's really good at getting off the boards, getting shots off, finding open space in the offensive zone. But now he's having to try and drive a line, and that's kind of limiting him. And it's kind of a confidence thing as well, because the reason players can be streaky is because they'll score a goal or two, is going to bring up their confidence, and then they're just going to go back out there and continue to perform. But in Sillinger's, sophomore season right now, one bad performance after another, and it affects his view of himself as a player. Doubt creeps in, that kind of thing. But once he reaches physical maturity, which he hasn't yet, um, once he's reached the top of his physical frame, you're going to see a Cole Sillinger who's much more effective along the boards, so comfortable at getting off the wall and getting shots off that the pure volume is going to get him enough points. I think Sillinger's due for, next year I'd see him put up 50 points. This is a type of player who's got so many different skills, especially in the offensive zone, that something's going to, be brought up positively. And I think also, he's been working on his defensive game. It was really sort of a lacking in his draft year. It was mainly sort of a pure offensive driver. But last year I saw improvement. This year I'm seeing some improvement. So maybe he's just also focusing on defensive aspects of his game. That's sort of limiting his amount of points. But I would see him very much being a future top six player for the Blue Jackets. I wouldn't be worried at all about this sophomore season.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the hunger, actually. Like, that's something, that's an angle that I hadn't thought about. Like, when I think about the sophomore slump, I always think about Dylan Larkin, for example, and he, I think, was the biggest standout to me because he was so fast. I think he surprised a lot of people in his rookie year. And then the second year came around and they were like, okay, well, we know how to handle him now. We're used to his speed. But I hadn't thought about it's tough to motivate yourself to stay in the NHL when you're again, it's playing on a bad team as well. I think probably doesn't help. I think that's a struggle. But when you look at like the fact that he's playing 9.5 minutes against probably an equally bad Montreal team, I think it's fair to say that's like you can understand where his confidence is kind of starting to get a little bit dented. And it's a really good point as well, like about him being not physically mature yet. I think it's because I'm not used to players making the NHL as an 18-year-old. This kid's 19.
Yeah.
He was born in 2003. Like, he's not even 20 yet. Coming up in a minute, I've got more conversation with Hadi about these two players. But first, I've got to tell you about BetOnline, because it is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer, esports. They've got it all at betonline.net. The World Cup is happening right now, so if you want to put some money on that, betonline.net is the perfect place to do so. If you love sports podcasts, and if you listen to Locked On Blue Jackets, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you do love sports podcasts. You can find those at BetOnline as well. They are the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today, use your laptop or your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. And I don't think there's anyone out there being like, man, Cole Sillinger's a bust. They should have drafted literally anyone else. But I think there's definitely people need to temper expectations with Cole Sillinger a little bit. I think because he had such a good rookie season, a lot of people were expecting him to come out and challenge for that like top line center spot, because the Blue Jackets don't really have a top line center. Like Boone Jenner is it by default, but the rest of their centers are, well, it's Jack Roslovic and Sean Corrali. Like, those are the centers that the Blue Jackets have, for better or worse,
Yeah.
So a lot of people were like, man, Cole Sillinger could be the top line center. Like, Cole Sillinger between Patrick Laine and Johnny Gaudreau, I do think would be a lot of fun. But
for me, that's a year or two down the line, for sure.
Right.
He'll need some time.
Yeah. Well, honestly, what I was really excited about was a line of Kent Johnson, Cole Sillinger, and Oliver Bjorkstrand. Like, that just felt like so much fun to me. And then the Blue Jackets ruined everything by trading Oliver Bjorkstrand to Seattle. But that is a podcast for another day. I'm not worried about Sillinger. I am concerned, I think, but that not about anything he's doing. I think it's that he's being a little bit mismanaged by the coaching staff
Yeah.
at the minute, which is frustrating, but there's nothing that like he can really do about that, I
Mhm.
don't think. So it is what it is. I want to kind of finish up. Literally, as Hadi and I were about to record, I checked Twitter and discovered that the Blue Jackets have signed Jordan Dumais to his entry-level contract, which is super exciting. If you don't know who Jordan Dumais is, then you should pay attention because this kid is lighting up the queue. So, Hadi, can you give us the 90-second rundown on Jordan Dumais?
Well, to start with, he's leading the queue with 49 points in 22 games, so he's well above 2 points a game right now. It's absolutely ridiculous. I've still not figured out why. That's the thing, because Jordan Dumais was in my 80s in my rankings in July. I wasn't the highest on him. I don't think anyone really was the highest on him. It's a combination of the two things. First, there's a proper lack of pace and really shoddy skating stride in this game. It's pretty tough to watch at times. His heels kick up. He's got not the greatest ankle flexion or knee bend. So there's a lot of mechanical issues with his stride. He doesn't get enough speed, and he struggles to stay upright and spin off properly. Access his outside edges. There's a bunch of different small issues with his skating, and he's not the biggest either. So those are the two main things that are sort of limiting Jordan Dumais in his sort of development. But other than that, he's just an outstanding dual threat scorer. He can shoot really well. He's really good at finding space off the puck, sneaking behind defenders, finding those little pockets and scoring. He reminds me a bit of Joshua Roy, who's a Habs prospect who they drafted in the 5th round. Both of them, for me, project as sort of third line forwards at the current moment. Because right now they're playing in the QMJHL, which is one of the poorest defensive leagues that you can find in junior. It's really easy to misdirect or sneak behind defenders. The positioning isn't ideal, so he's benefiting. Obviously he's got way above average off puck positioning, but since he's playing in a league where off puck positioning is pretty much all you need to score, it's very easy for him to get those points and fire up the score sheet. But the main thing for me is just sort of the anticipation with him. That's the main thing that makes him so promising to me, is he sees play about 2 steps ahead. And when you've got that and you've got the intensity that he has, that's a very promising package. So I think if he builds up his playmaking, if his skating improves a lot, those are the two main things that are limiting him from having top 6 potential. But if you fix those two things, which is a big ask, if I'm honest. The amount of fixing that's required in a skating stride, it almost needs complete rework. But if you manage to do that with Jordan Dumais, you could have a bona fide top 6 player, but it's a long shot. I still think he's got NHL potential for sure. I think he's one of those guys that, especially with the production that he's able to put up, he's pretty much going to play in the NHL at least some games. But he's far from a top 6 role, and there's a lot of sort of benchmarks he has to hit in his development to get there.
In a minute, I've got the end of my conversation with Hadi about Jordan Dumais. That's coming up next on Locked On Blue Jackets. So is he a guy that, obviously he's signing his ELC now doesn't mean that he's going to play in the NHL tomorrow, but it means that the Blue Jackets have enough faith in him that they could see this, down the line.
Yeah.
Is he a guy that's, going to show up to training camp next year and be an option? Or is he maybe 2 or 3 years down the line?
I'd say he's at least 2 years down the line. If they bring him in to play him in their bottom 6, sure, that could be an option. I think he would be a decent sort of plug and play type of option as soon as next year. But for me, the type of player that I see him sort of developing into, the amount of work that's required in his skating and all that takes a lot of time to sort of rework and develop properly. So the best thing for his development would probably be to spend his whole career in the queue, and then once he's aged out of the queue, to reach the AHL, play a couple games, and get to the NHL. I think that would be the best career path for him development-wise, so he can learn the right things at the right moment. An even better thing that would be good for him is a loan out to a pro league overseas, because that would really help him a lot, because he plays a very good junior scorer game, and I think he's already too good for the queue. I think his scoring pays to show that more than well enough, but the pro habits aren't there. Obviously, the off-puck positioning is pro-ready for me. It's really his best asset. But outside of that, if you want to work on his skating, find him a lot of open ice to play with. Send him to Sweden, send him to Finland, something like that. That'll probably be the best place for him to learn the right things in order to develop into a pro-ready prospect on every aspect. But right now, given the limited options that the CHL NHL agreement provides, I think the best thing for him is just to dominate the queue as much as he can and spend as much as time over there and get weekly visits from the Blue Jackets staff to work on his skating and sort of streamline his development in a good direction.
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's definitely, we talked a little bit about Kent Johnson's confidence and Cole Sillinger's confidence. Like, there are probably worse things to do to a player's confidence than let him score 150 points in the queue. Which, I mean, you talk about it being a poor defensive league, and it is probably the weakest of the three.
Yeah.
Canadian junior hockey leagues, but he's also putting up points that we haven't seen someone do since, I think, literally Sidney Crosby in 2003.
Yeah.
So it's
the only thing I'd say about that is it's sort of like playing, I don't know if you play NHL, but it's like playing NHL on rookie mode when you're already way too good for that mode. Like, yes, you're gonna have fun and beat your high scores and all that, but are you actually getting better at the game? The thing that gets you better at the game is going to the level that's tough for you, developing the new skills, the new habits, the new sort of little tricks to beat that level, and then going up a level from there. That's how you get better at the game, right? So dominating a league year in, year out is really good for confidence. Is it good for skill development? I'm not too sure. Which is why I'd be more inclined on finding a pro league for Dumais to play in as soon as possible. But I mean, he's still gonna have fun. He's still gonna sort of dominate at that level and win a couple trophies. That's good for his leadership. That's good for his confidence. So it's just it's a give and take. But for me, definitely finding a pro league for Dumais would be the best.
Yeah, for sure. I think what might be the kind of the most indicative of Dumais is what he does next year.
Yeah.
Because obviously he's fresh out of the draft this year. He feels like he's got something to prove.
Mm-hmm.
A 5'8" kid that's leading the scoring. Like, is he leading the entire scoring at the CHL race, or is Connor Bedard overtaking him again?
I'm almost 100. Not the entire not the entire CHL, but honestly, with the difference between the leagues, it's more worth it for me to sort of compare within the different leagues rather than CHL wide. But right now, he is leading by 11 points, the QMJHL. So he's more than dominating that league.
Yeah. So I think it'll be interesting to see what he does next season when, we talked about Cole Sillinger's kind of that lack of hunger. I think it'll be interesting to see what Dumais does when he doesn't feel like he has anything to prove next season. Maybe he goes to training camp, gets a couple of preseason games, goes back to the queue. And if he's still dominating next season, I think that's probably a pretty good sign for
sure.
things to come.
Yeah.
So if people want to learn more about either Blue Jackets prospects or prospects in general, I do highly recommend Locked On NHL Prospects. It's one of my first listens every day. I have a great time learning about prospects because it's something that I'm always super interested in, but there's just so many of them that I can't keep up with every single prospect. I'm good for like maybe the first 2 rounds of the draft plus all of the Blue Jackets prospects, and then that's beyond that is beyond me. But Hadi does a great job with Locked On NHL Prospects, so people should listen to that. And where else can people find you and your work online?
Well, I post an article about once a week on Habs Eyes on the Prize about the North American prospects of the Montreal Canadiens. I also do some work for Dauber Prospects. I'm their QMJHL scout. So I scout all the QMJHL prospects for each draft year. This year's the 2023 draft. There's a couple good ones. Ethan Gauthier, Jordan Dumais. But you'll also find me on YouTube. I've got my own personal channel. If you just look up my full name, you'll be able to look it up pretty quickly. And obviously, Locked On NHL Prospect is on YouTube as well. I'm on multiple platforms, mainly on Twitter at HadiK_scouting. That's where I post all of that. So that's where you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, with the Blue Jackets looking poised to be picking probably in the top 10 of the 2023 draft, I'm sure that we're going to see you on this show a fair amount as we start ramping up our draft coverage. I think I started my draft coverage February 1st last season, and I'm inclined to start it a little bit earlier this year because the Blue Jackets are just real bad.
Absolutely.
But thank you for coming to talk prospect and Cole Sillinger, because I always love to talk about Cole Sillinger on this show and any show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow, we are going to be looking ahead to the Vegas Golden Knights game tomorrow night. So we'll do a quick game preview for that, and we'll check in with the Cleveland Monsters as well. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode and for making it your first listen of the day every day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and also over on YouTube. You're never going to have to get behind a paywall for a Locked On product. That is our promise to you. So thank you for listening. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the podcast at LO_Blue Jackets. And if you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.